Okay, so chapter 2 is going to take us to property ownership and interests. Property ownership and interests. Now, we talked about these earlier, right? This is our deep sea. If you look at it, it's for we have, when we buy this bundle of legal rights, when we buy this house, we get these. All right, and this is part of ownership. Now, it is also part of a leasehold. If we have a leasehold, we can do it. They're explained a little differently, but we can do this, all right? But let's assume we bought this property. When we buy this property, we have the right to possession. We can move in, okay? We hold it, we own it. We can control that property and any profits that happens off of that property. Maybe we want to put a little store in there. Maybe we want to do hairdresser in there. Maybe we want to do accounting in there. Whatever, as long as it's allowed by law, we can do that and control the environment. Obviously, we get to enjoy it, right? We want to have the Saturday night parties in the backyard, we can do so. We want to have quiet time, whatever that is, we can enjoy it as we see fit, okay? We can exclude. We have the right of exclusion, all right? We don't want people coming on, we don't want people coming on our property. We don't want those people harassing us. Has anybody seen Gran Torino, the movie Gran Torino? Clint Eastwood sitting on his porch, the ultimate get off my lawn guy, right? He's sitting on his porch with his shotgun saying, just don't, right? So ultimately you can do that. There's no law that says you can't. Now you can't be shooting people, but you can scare them, okay? So that's exclusion. I can exclude people. And then disposition. I can dispose of this any way I want. Sell it, rent it. If I want to tear it down, I can tear it down. Do whatever I want with it, right? So disposition. So these are things that I get. This is my bundle of legal rights. This is what creates real property, okay? This bundle of legal rights. So if you look at it, D, E, E, P, and then C. So disposition, exclusion, enjoyment, possession, and then control is the C. Okay, that is what the bundle of legal rights is. Anybody have any questions on any of those? This is pretty core. This is pretty much, this is our why, right? Why does anybody want to have a house on the beach? Yeah, it's a nice house, but there's a reason it's a nice house. Why? So I get to hold it. It's mine, right? I get to enjoy it. I get to control it. I get to do all those things. Not that, I mean, the house is fine, but I get to do all of these things. Keyword here, keyword here. The word is called appurtenance. Appurtenance, all right? And the word appurtenance just simply means it runs with the land. Runs with the land. So if something is an easement appurtenant, that means that regardless of how many times you sell it, it still has that easement on it, constantly, regardless of the owner, okay? So it says a right or privilege that goes with ownership of land, includes the subsurface, air, and water rights. We're going to talk about those in a second. We have those rights. And if I sell my property, do I get to keep the subsurface rights? Depends, right? I could, but if I just sell it as it is without separating them, I could, they get it. It's appurtenant. Just goes to the new owner. All right. So appurtenant means it is attached to the land. Is your house an appurtenance? Yeah, right. You're selling the house. This goes with the land. Okay. That's a key word. We're going to be learning that. We're going to be using that. Let's talk about those subsurface rights. Who's the most famous, fictional or not, person you know that made money off of subsurface rights? Jed Clampett, the Beverly Hillbillies. You guys ever hear of the Beverly Hillbillies? Some are going to say yes, some are going to say no, right? He was outside hunting in Tennessee or Kentucky, wherever he was, and he shot went squirrel hunting and shot a hole in the ground. And up through the ground come a bubbling crude. Oil, that is, Texas tea, black gold, right? And next thing you know, what? Old Jed's a millionaire, moves out to the Beverly Hills. Because who owned the oil? My boy Jed, he owned the oil, right? So that means that he had subsurface rights on that property. he called his local, his local person there, and he said, I want this pumped, get it out. And they were pumping it up and paying Jed. Now, that's a fictional issue, but very true on subsurface rights. We own it. I have a gentleman, my own personal client, not me personally, but my own personal client. He lived in Pennsylvania with his partner, and they had a farm up there. And they found natural gas. You all heard of fracking, right? That's a today thing, fracking, right? So they were pulling natural gas out of there, out of his farmland. He came down and bought 5 houses from me. I hope all of you get one of those guys. And he was a sweet guy, great guy. He came down, he said, I'm getting money, I'm not paying anything. They're throwing me checks. Jimmy Buffett put out a song called Mailbox Money. All he has to do is go to the mailbox and somebody send him a check. That's what he was getting for this fracking. They were pulling this natural gas out. So he was taking it and investing it in properties. I got 5 sales out the dude. I'm not complaining. I hope they find many, many more fissures of natural gas up there. So yeah, he was getting money. So this is subsurface rights. They own that. Now, we talked about appurtenance just a second ago. We talked about that. Now, if I wanted to sell my house, and let's say I'm going to sell it to Tyler, and I say to Tyler, all right, look, buddy, you can have the house and you can have the air rights, but I'm keeping the subsurface rights. I'm not selling you those. Yeah, I can do that. Yes, I can. I can separate them. A matter of fact, not a lot, but watch your new homes contracts. A lot of developers are taking that new home, and holding the subsurface rights. So they're getting to keep the subsurface rights. You're buying the house and the any airspace above, but the developers probably, or could be, I'm not saying they all do it, but some do, holding the subsurface rights. In the event they find gold on that property or oil or anything else, minerals, okay? They own, whoever owns it. You can sell them. I can sell my airspace, air rights. Let's say I have a strip mall. I got a small strip mall. It's not very big, but I got it. And we don't have a restaurant or an entertainment area, but we have some nice little stores and a nice big parking lot, right? And Shanta comes to me one day and she says, Sam, I have a great idea for a restaurant entertainment complex, but I don't have any space. Can I buy your air rights from you? I'll say, Shanta, is this building, capable of holding what you want to do? And she said, yep, I did the engineering. Everything looks good. Let's figure out a price for your air rights. And I want to build my restaurant entertainment complex right above your group of stores here, your strip mall. We figure it out. She buys my air rights. I no longer own them. I still own my strip mall. Now she comes in and she builds her restaurant and entertainment complex. And now who owns the air rights? Shanta owns the air rights, right? I sold them, I made my money. They are severable. They are severable, okay? So you can sell your surface right, you can sell your subsurface rights, you can sell your air rights, okay? You can keep the land. You can do either one. You can't get into a flight line. You can't sell space in the flight line. With air rights, you have to be very, very careful. You can't be in a flight line and you're subject to government controls, okay? Is anybody familiar with Seminole Hard Rock Park in Fort Lauderdale? Google it when we're done here or on your break. And they have a hotel that's in the shape of a huge guitar. And I'm talking about a huge guitar. It's got like 1,000 hotel rooms in it, okay? Well, what their job was, or what they wanted to do, was they wanted to build the neck of the guitar up and make it a complete guitar. Well, right now, there is a little stub about 3 frets up, and that's as high as they can go. What they found out as they were doing all this engineering was that on particular days, that neck of that guitar was going to be in the direct flight line for Fort Lauderdale Airport, Fort Lauderdale International, which is literally down the road. So they couldn't extend the neck of the guitar up. But now they have this 1,000-seat guitar, right, that they use. It's the Seminole Hard Rock in Fort Lauderdale, right? They have this big, huge guitar. It's incredible. And now what they do is, you know, people are a heck of a lot smarter than I am. They, instead of them having the strings and the neck and everything else, they have 6 big industrial floodlights that sit on the top of that building. And every so often on certain things, what they do is they fire up all 6 of them. And what's it look like? It looks like strings going up into the air or into infinity. Very, very clever people. All right. It says, how can your air rights be from surface to infinity? As long as I don't have any restrictions, I can. But government restrictions come first, and that's unfortunate, but that's the price we pay for having them, right? And again, they're not just arbitrarily, you know, you can't put, if they would have built that neck of guitar and they hit it with a plane and 500 people died, that would probably not be a good idea, right? So there has to be some rules. 9/11, when 9/11 happened, they scrambled fighter jets all over DC and Common. So it would have been very, very difficult for them to get to the Capitol building and to get to the White House because they were scrambled. There's a no-fly zone. They did get to the Pentagon, but that's outside the no-fly zone. So yes, there's all kinds of rules and regulations that are involved there. So yeah, same thing with high tension wires. They have what's called a right of way, right? The electrical wires that run along the back of your property, right? That's an easement and gross. They have that. They could also have what's called eminent domain. Somebody mentioned it earlier, right? Tyler mentioned it earlier, which says that anytime the government wants to take your property for the public good, they can. All right. The law is eminent domain. The act is condemnation, and they can condemn your air rights if they need it. You can take it to court if you don't think it's enough, but they all only have to do just compensation, whatever it is. And they have an appraiser. They'll have an appraiser come out and they'll say, you know, this is worth this or whatever. Now, you're not going to get bust out retail, I promise you, but you're going to get some money. And you can take, now with the laws, you can take the money, but you can't, and you can still go to court and say it's not enough. And you can do that now. So you can take that as a minimum. So yeah, we have, the government does get in the way sometimes. It does. But if you need a 5-lane, you know, remember where I just talked about that 1,500 houses? If we had a 2-lane road, would that be a burden on that 2-lane road? We'd have too much truck. So what the government has to do is take that, make it a 5-lane road, 4 and a turn lane, right? So how do they get that property on each side of that road? Somebody owns it. So what they can do is that the law, and we'll talk about this later on, but the law is called eminent domain. The government can take private property for public good, okay? And the act is called condemnation. And they condemn the land, they take the land, they use it for the public good. It has to be for public good, and they have to pay you just compensation. I don't have any kind of definition of just compensation. I also don't know what the word reasonable means either, specifically, because they use that word like 500 times, right? Yeah, the word reasonable is always out there, so I consider it a weasel word. You can define it any way you want, whatever that means, but it's out there, okay? All right, so air rights, subsurface rights, and we'll talk about subsurface rights a little bit more later on, because we have lateral rights and subjacent rights, right? And we'll talk about those in a little bit. Let's talk about water rights. Now, water rights are appurtenant. That means when I move, I can't take my water rights with me, okay? And we have 2 different types of water rights. We have riparian rights. Now think riparian rivers and streams. Rivers and streams. If we are on a little stream, okay? Let's say Shamar and I were neighbors, but in between our 2 properties is a little brook, right? We both, because it's not navigable, We can't float a boat down there, right? It's a stream. If there is not navigable, we are owned to the center of that stream, each one of us. She owns to the center, I own to the center. That's where our property line is. We can't float a boat. However, if that stream is big enough to float a boat on, and we can put it in there, we own to the water's edge. We own to the water's edge. The public or the government, the public owns the water. Okay? The public owns the water. If we can float a boat down there. All right? So if there's just a brook or a stream and it's not navigable, we own to the center of the property. These are our riparian rights, rivers, riparian streams. All right? Non-navigable, we own to the center. If it is navigable, we own to the water's edge. Okay? We own to the water's edge. Everybody good with that? Riparian rights. Okay. Now, littoral rights are lakes and oceans, anything that's tidal. Okay? Anything that's tidal. Lakes and oceans. Now, we own, when we own on a waterfront property, we own to the average high water mark. The average high water mark. Okay? So where the high tide comes to, that's our property line. Now you say, well, who owns when the tide goes out? That's called foreshore. Foreshore. Foreshore, like, right? Foreshore, we'll get to both of those. How does the Doctrine of Water tie into the rights? We'll get to actually both of those. Hang in there. The government or the state of North Carolina owns the foreshore. From the high water mark to wherever the water level is at low tide, that's how you have public beaches. Okay? So the strip of land between the high and low tides is the foreshore, and it belongs to the state of North Carolina. Okay? So that's how that breaks out, all right? So every beach in North Carolina is a public beach under the public trust doctrine. All right? Property owner owns to the high water line, and the public or the state or the public owns the balance. Okay? It's called foreshore, F-H-O-R-E, foreshore. All right? All right. So how does a Doctrine of Water tie into the rights? A Doctrine of Water, first of all, has to be approved by the Army Corps of Engineers. Okay? Has to be approved by the Army Corps of Engineers. All right, first, is everybody good with littoral? Riparian, all right, rivers and streams. Littoral, we own to the average high water mark because water rights cannot be retained when the property is transferred. Now, I also can use the water in any way that I'd like, as long as I don't defer anything downstream. So a mile down the stream cannot be affected by something I'm doing. I can't dam the river. I can't dam my stream, okay? I can't do that. I'm not allowed. If I want to put a dock in there, I have to get approval by the Army Corps of Engineers and usually the Office of Coastal Resource Management, all right? Has anybody ever dealt with the Army Corps of Engineers? If there's one group you'd rather go see, if you had a choice between dentists and dealing with the Army Corps of Engineers, go for the root canal, okay? They will not budge. They are going to, it's going to take a long time. It's going to cost you some money. There's going to be a lot of things, even taking one down, it takes a lot to get through the Army Corps of Engineers, all right? So if they allow it, it'll be relatively, it's going to be safe for everything downstream. They're going to do environmental impact studies. They're going to see what kind of materials you're going to use. They're going to see how it's going to affect downstream. Trust me, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a lot. All right. So they are the group that handles docks. Okay. And we're going to talk about changes over time. Just stick with me for two more slides, because rivers dry up, right? Or they get higher. So we lose property or we gain property that way. So bear with me a couple more slides. I'll get there, Kimberly, I promise. All right. Doctrine of prior appropriation, something we need to talk about, at least just touch here. Out west, any of you folks from out west, California, New Mexico, Arizona, all of those, there's a desperate need for water. And they get water not so much from the Pacific Ocean because they can't possibly desalinate that much water, but they get it out of the Colorado River. They get it off of Lake Mead. They get it off of all those lakes that are inland. Now, if you've seen pictures of Lake Mead recently, that water is way low, way low. But the doctrine of prior appropriation says that the person who owns the water is the person who made claim to it. So the state of California, because they needed water from the Colorado River, because they needed that water, that's their area. They can take the water out of that lake. All right. Same thing with Oregon. Same thing with Washington State. Okay. So they are, the prior appropriation doctrine states that the water rights are determined by priority of beneficial use. Those people need the water, so they're taking it out of there. They get the first rights to it. And that only happens in the western states, right? So you may have land that borders the water, but you have no rights to the water in those particular cases that have that prior appropriation. All right. Just touch on it, just understand that it's there. It is out west. All right. We just want to talk about it. Make sure everybody understands it. Those folks do need the water and they have the right to go get it. Okay. And it has to do with state governments that are out there. These run with the land, right? Our subsurfaces, if we sell a property, our subsurfaces go, right? We talked about our air rights. We talked about water rights, which are our riparian rights for rivers, our littoral rights for lakes and oceans, right? High watermark for that. Now, accretion. Let's talk about accretion. If I live on the ocean front, or if I live on the river banks, that river, everybody understands that water is extremely strong, a lot stronger than we are, period, right? I dive. Does anybody ever dive? Does anybody dive? You learn respect for the water. I dive. I can tell you that you are no match for Mother Nature, period, all right? You're not. She's going to do whatever she wants with you. But water is extremely strong. So as it's going and pushing through this river, it's pushing up sand and dirt. So it's leaving little flecks of dirt behind it. What about the sand dunes on the beachfront? It's not measurable, but how do you think it gets there? They grow all the time. Because why? Because the water pushes it up, pushes that sand up. So that's accretion, all right? That is that gradual increase of land that keeps coming over, all right? That gradual increase. Now, next time you're at the beachfront, I want you to grab a kid's bucket. I want you to make sure there's no sand in it whatsoever. And I want you to try this test. Make sure there's no sand in it whatsoever. Make sure it's clean. I want you to walk out about waist deep. And then I want you to just take that bucket and about 6 inches deep, I want you to just scooch that bucket out and I want you to bring that bucket back to the land and sit it on the beach and let it sit there for about 5 minutes. Now, if it was clean when it went out there, I'm willing to bet that after 5 minutes of looking at it in the beach, there's going to be sand in the bottom of that bucket because sand is moving constantly. Dunes are growing constantly. That's all called accretion. Those little imperceptible flicks that they're left behind when the water moves out, it's leaving dirt. Same thing when it's coming down through a river. It's pushing up. Okay, it's pushing up. So that's a gradual increase. Now, your question was, what if it changes over time, Kimberly? Well, what happens if the lake dries up? What happens if our stream dries up? What if there was a boat there? What if we could run a barge down there? And much like Lake Mead, right, the water rescinds. I still own to the water's edge. Shamara still owns to the water's edge. So where's the water's edge now? The water's edge, I'm gaining property. I'm gaining property because the rule is the water's edge. Okay, so as that is drying up, I am gaining property because my property line goes to the water's edge. Now, is it the way I want to gain property? No, but that is the law. And that's called reliction, okay? And that is new land acquired by water receding or disappearing. If that river dries up, we can put a fence down the middle of it, right? It's all land. I own to the middle of the stream. Shamara owns to the middle of the stream. So that's what happens when the water dries up. Now, accretion is the extra dirt that's left from the water rushing. Reliction is when the water dries up. Okay, when the water dries up, that is reliction. Water, I told you, water is powerful. You're not going to mess with Mother Nature. But over millions of years of pounding, this is how you get your craggy shorelines. This is how you get those thunder holes or those arches, Darwin's arch, where all this big massive rock and it's got a big hole in it. Well, that just didn't show up from a weakness in a rock, right? That is erosion, years and years of being pelted with water, wearing it down, slow, 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 right? Matter of fact, Darwin's arch in the Galapagos just collapsed. The main posts are up, but the center fell down. All right, it just eroded to the point where it was no good anymore. So anytime you see one of those big thunder holes, or where water comes splashing up, or anything, any kind of big hole in the rock, that's erosion. Okay, that's erosion, and it takes thousands of years, maybe longer than thousands of years, in order for that to happen. All right, very, very slow, but it is powerful. Now, evulsion is just the opposite. What if we have an earthquake? Land splits, landslide, right? Yeah, the Grand Canyon is a perfect example of just erosion, just went away. They used to be full lake, now it's gone. Now, I don't know how long, millions of years probably, but yeah, that's exactly right. Evulsion, on the other hand, is when land is, if you lived on the waterfront and you got this big old hurricane that went through there and it washed out a whole bunch of beachfront, just went away, that's evulsion, okay? The loss of land by the sudden act of nature, avalanche, flood, right? Coming down, moving, right? Landslides. California, you see them all the time, all along the West Coast. You see some of them locally, but not too much, all right? So the sudden, rapid rip away of land, all right? Boom, gone. That's evulsion. Evulsion, all right? Sinkholes. Now, why they put this support rights here, this has to do with them drilling your subsurface rights, all right? Drilling oil from outside your, let's say they struck oil. Let's say you're Jed Clampett, they struck oil. So they're taking that oil out and they're sucking it up. What happens when they suck it up? Leaves a pretty big cavity in there, right? You think? They have to replace it with something. They can't just leave this big cavity there, all right? So the first thing they have to do is lateral support. If they're pulling oil out of my land, they can't suck up the land so hard that it affects my neighbor's property. So they have to keep the property line correct, okay? So they have to support the property line. They cannot let their land collapse while they're pulling oil out of mine, all right? That is lateral support. Also, what they can't do is they can't let my ground collapse underneath because they're sucking out oil, right? If they suck out the oil and then all of a sudden I have a big old sinkhole in my yard because that's where everything went, that's called subjacent support, and they can't do that either, right? They can't let my land collapse nor the neighbors. Now, I don't know much about oil drilling, but here's what I know, is that as they're pulling up and creating a void, they're pumping in sand from the other side to try to keep it full, right? As they're pulling out other stuff, and there are other kinds of materials. Sometimes they're just adding water back, pulling out oil, so that they can keep everything on top of the land, right? So they can't be just getting big cavities in the land because they're pulling stuff out. So lateral support is for the neighbors, those lot lines, and for subjacent support, again, just underneath where they were, okay? So we talked about support rights, which is lateral support, subjacent support. We can't let the land collapse around us while we're pulling stuff out from underneath. Gold or minerals or oil, anything else like that, gas. Let's start talking about appurtenant easements a little bit, all right? So we have there are some benefits to having these appurtenant easements. If we get the new buyer, because it runs with the land, you own the house on the waterfront. You own to the high water mark. You sell the house. You can't keep the water rights. They are pertinent to the property, okay? So access to the property across another person's property. Maybe you own a house that needs to go across my backyard in order to get to yours because there's no other way to get there. You get to use my land for nothing, okay? Because you need to. I can't landlock you. We're going to talk a lot about easements in a few minutes. So there are other things. What if I had the beach access was on the edge of my property and everybody was walking up and down to the beach access? And then all of a sudden I sold the property and the new owner comes in and puts a big old gate in front of the beach access. I'm pretty sure that the next person I'm going to see at my front door is going to be the police telling me to take the gate down because it's been public access. I've given them the access for years. I can't just, it's by prescription now. I can't just block it off because I've let them done it for so long. So these things stay, they don't go. New owner buys them, they buy them as is, right? That's appurtenant easements. Restrictive covenants, these are inside your development, your subdivision. And this is your CC&Rs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions that you'll sign when you move into this neighborhood that you're going to abide by the bylaws. We'll talk more about those in chapter 6, all right? But it kind of makes rules. Makes rules that you need to abide by. Keeps the property, nicer, keeps the values up. Yes, I know, sometimes they're a pain in the neck, but in the big picture, they're not terrible. They're not terrible. Let's talk about real property versus personal property. Real property versus personal property. Now, I told you before about how you find out personal property, right? Take the house over, tip it over, and whatever falls out. Now, your landscaping will not fall out, right? If you have plants, bushes, things of that nature, right? As you see in this picture, these are all planted to stay. They're not annuals, right? They're not annuals. Those bushes stay there for as many years as they're allowed to grow, right? All of these trees, everything else like this. They belong to the land. They are real property. They're not personal property. You can't take those with you, all right? So if they don't require annual cultivation, they're called fructus naturalis, plants or fruits of the soil. Fruits of the soil, and they are real property. Now, that's a little different than what we're going to talk about next, though. We are going to talk about fructus industrialis. All right, these are annual crops. Annual crops. They're called emblements. Right now, they're considered personal property if they're planted by a tenant farmer. And let me give you a little more explanation of that. Okay. A lot of farmers don't own the land that they're farming. Maybe it's a big organization that owns it. Maybe it's somebody who's not much of a farmer, just has a lot of land. So a tenant farmer will lease the land to grow crops. That's not unusual, right? Matter of fact, it happens a lot. So if I'm the tenant farmer and Jonathan is the owner of the land, and let's say it is come March, I plant my corn, assuming it's going to be up and ready by August. And come June or July, Jonathan sells the property. What's going to happen to my corn? They can't just shut me out, right? So I have the ability one time to come back and get my corn when it's ready. That is called an emblement. An emblement, okay? If I am the tenant farmer, I am allowed to come back. It's my personal property to come back and get that emblement, get that annual crop. Not perennial crops, not crops that keep coming up every year, annual. I planted them in March. I can come back and get them in August when I want, regardless of when the sale happened, okay? If they're going to tear it down and build houses, I still can come back and get my product. They can't touch my crop until after I pull it out. Let's say Jonathan was the farmer, and he sells the property. It's his property. He sells it. Can he come back and get his corn? No, he cannot. Only the tenant farmer who has no choice in the issue can go back, all right? As a tenant farmer, I can go back. Is there a time frame that you have to get your coin back? When it's right, when it's ready for picking. It could be corn, it could be tomatoes, it could be eggplant, it could be peppers. Whenever that's ready to be picked, you can go back and get it. But only once, 1 year. Because obviously you're not going to come back next year and plant those crops again. It has to be annual crops. Okay. So whenever it's due, whenever it's ready. So now the owner, who's the farmer, they can't come back. They can plow it under. It's part of the sale. If they're selling it for farmland, it's part of the sale. If they're selling it for, housing, you can make a deal probably to come back and get it, or they can just plow it under. I went to the Home Depot the other day and I bought a fence and some posts, and I put them in my yard and I laid them down. I didn't put them on the ground yet. I didn't put them up yet. Is that personal property or is that real property? Yeah, it's personal. Tomorrow I'm going to put it on the ground and I'm going to put that fence up. Is that personal or real property? It's real because you used it, you put it in the land. It's a permanent installation. Yeah, absolutely. So that is called by annexation. I bought it at the Home Depot. It was mine. It's personal property. I bring it in. I kick it out of the truck, lay it in the backyard. That's all personal property. I put it up. Once I put it up and it's in the land and it becomes a permanent fixture, that is real property. Okay. And that's annexation. But let's say in order for me to put that fence up, there's a tree right in the fence line. So that tree, as it's standing today, I haven't put the fence up yet. Is that real property or personal property? Real property, right? It's standing, it's living, it's on the ground. If I go pull my chainsaw out tonight and knock it on the ground, is it real property anymore? It is not. It's personal property. Once it's disassociated from the land and it lays on the ground and I start chopping it up for firewood, it's personal property. And that is by severance.
If you like this video, feel free to share it with a friend. For more real estate education content, please subscribe to the channel. From all of us at Seacoast Real Estate Academy, thank you for watching.